My name is Margaret Fitzgerald, but I go by Peggy Fitzgerald. I currently work at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, where I am a lecturer of Japanese. I teach elementary Japanese, and I also teach Japanese popular culture. My bachelor's degree was done at Cleveland State University. I graduated in 1982 with a double major in linguistics and Spanish. In 1983, I went to Japan, to Mieiken, and taught at an English conversation school. In 1988, after I returned from Japan, I studied, pardon me. In 1986, after having returned from Japan, I went to Cuyahoga Community College and studied Japanese for 2 years. At that time, it wasn't possible to study Japanese. The courses didn't exist. And in 1986, Cuyahoga Community College initiated one of the first Japanese language programs in the Cleveland area. So I went there and studied Japanese for 2 years. And then in 1988, I came to Ohio State University, and I studied at Ohio State from 1988 to 1990. And I got my master's degree in Japanese linguistics in 1990. I graduated in the summer, August 1990. It changed my life. Going to Japan, when I went to Japan, I had no training in Japanese. Japanese courses did not exist. And I often would compare it to sort of jumping off a cliff into a river because I knew essentially nothing. However, because I had an interest in language and culture, when I was in Japan as an English teacher, I began to study Japanese with my coworkers, and then one of my coworkers found a summer program for me. And the month of August was the vacation time period, so I went to a summer Japanese language program for 3 or 4 weeks and initiated my formal study of Japanese. Anyway, when I lived in Japan for 1.5 years, I came back home, I studied on my own. Eventually I engaged in formal study, but by studying Japanese, it established my career, or allowed me to establish a career as a Japanese language teacher. It changed my life. So I had and I maintain an interest in Japanese language and culture, Japanese foods, Japanese folk culture, and Japanese popular culture, but just in the culture in general. And so that is the basis from which I teach. I've been teaching at Case Western Reserve for about 18 or 19 years. Well, in addition to studying Japanese when I was a university student, I also studied Spanish. Well, I studied Spanish in high school and then at university. Also, as an undergraduate, I was a linguistics major. I studied a bit of French, a bit of German, a bit of American Sign Language, and also Sanskrit. I love languages, and I love languages. I love to meet people from different cultures. And certainly, if I hadn't studied Japanese or got into this, my life would be completely different. Okay, part of what I find I find a lot of things about Japan interesting. It's kind of hard for me to put it into words to pick out specific things, but I definitely like the food culture. I love Japanese food. I like to prepare the food, and I like the food culture. I think it's very healthy and delicious. Also, there is something about the ambience of being in Japan that I like. There is something about the temperament of the people or the focus of the culture that I resonate with. Okay, I enjoyed when I was a tourist, for example, or touring around Japan. I enjoyed going to Shinto shrines and to Buddhist temples, but perhaps more so Shinto shrines. I like the aspect of nature that is focused on in Shinto. I like the visiting shrines that are like remote and out of the way. I enjoy that very much. There's something very deeply moving about it that appeals to me. also the ambience of the country, just the feel of being there. When I'm in Japan, sometimes I almost feel like I'm a different person in a way. Some of the challenges, and maybe when I was in Japan, this is about, 30-some years ago, my first time. The thing that was very challenging for me, and I think I'm not alone in this, was being the gaijin, okay? The gaijin experience, and being pointed out and being, like the recipient of that kind of attention, I found extremely difficult. Yeah. And that for me was the challenge at the time. I was, at that time, I think I was lonely, and because I hadn't had preparation to study in Japan, I didn't know the language when I came. Also because there wasn't an opportunity to study it, because I came alone to Japan, not having had a true cultural preparation to go into the country, and because I was like alone there in a sense, before it was popular to do so, I think it was a difficult experience. I think perhaps students today have a much greater support system, and generally go in with some language background, and if they're going with a school program, they have the support of their school program, and they have the benefit of learning so much that we have learned about Japan, and the kind of connections that have been built between Japan and the United States are much greater now to support students, which is good. Yes, I am. I teach Japanese. Yeah, I teach Japanese at Case Western Reserve. I have friends. I'm involved. I have been involved with, Association of Teachers of Japanese and those kind of things. Perhaps right now I'm not as actively involved as I was in the past, but I'm still involved. Yeah. My advice would be that you prepare yourself well. I would suggest that you study like for 2 years, do preparation of 2 years to get basic elementary Japanese, whether you study on your own or whether you study in a program. I think it's good to find a good program, a supportive program. Then I would suggest a student would study abroad. If you go to university, if that's your initiation to Japanese, do your first 2 years of study at the university, do your junior year abroad, or whatever the equivalent is, and so that you can go to Japan and develop your language abilities in a supportive environment. And then once you have that knowledge of and ability to interact in the language, in the culture, then go back and do the JET program, or get an internship, or go back more on your own. But by that, I think that would be a good foundation for building your abilities to function in the language. And of course, and develop whatever other skills you have, but to develop the language, to be a teacher, that's my advice.